So let's just get started. So this is, for context, this is a talk that I gave pretty consistently for about a year in 2021 before replacing it with my current talk, how to take your startup from idea to production. I have a recording of that if anyone is interested in that. I'll just drop it in the chat real quick. So if you're interested in hearing my most up-to-date talk, the link to it is here. Boy, it would be nice if Chrome was faster.
It hates tabs.
It sure does, which is a shame because I love tabs. Here's the link. And dropping this in the chat. So if you want to hear more of me, you can here. Okay, anyway, let's get on to the talk that I am giving. 7 startups, 7 lessons, which I need to update to be called 12 startups, 12 lessons. But at the time, I was 7 startups in, and I'm going to share one valuable lesson that I learned from each of the 7 startups. This is meant, when I deliver it, to be a very interactive talk. So I'm hoping for pushback, or for you to tell me your experience was different, or for you to hop on and say, I completely agree, I had the same experience. So we can all learn from each other interactively. Like if this talk goes right, I should learn just as much from y'all as you learned from me. So that said, I'm a professional software developer of over 20 years. Beginning in 2014, I started serially hopping from one startup to the next, taking them in their early stages from idea to production MVP before moving on to the next one. And I'm a multi-time CTO, VP of engineering, lead engineer, chief engineer. Usually I'm working on 0 to 1 startups, which aren't too big on titles. So I'm just that guy, that guy. So every startup is different, but in some respects, they can all be very alike. I run into the same patterns and trends over and over again. The growing pains keep happening in the same spots. The whole purpose of this talk is to make sure that you don't make the same mistakes I did, because once is enough. So this is not a research-based talk. This is an experience-based talk. And I find that whenever you speak in axioms, there's always an opposing axiom. So the clearest example of this I like to give is you'll read a lot of startup advice that talks about never deviate from your vision, right? They'll talk about how a company like Instagram had this vision of being the cleanest, most polished photo sharing app there ever was, and they never deviated from that. And it ended with $1 billion acquisition by Facebook. They never let anything cloud their vision. You'll also see startup advice that says, be ready to pivot on a dime. So one day you're making wearable watches, and then all of a sudden a huge contract stumbles into your lap, or you get a new supplier in a certain area, and then the next thing you know, you're making kitchen knives. That's also good advice. So both of these axioms can be true. You need to know which one to apply when. Okay, so my first lesson, and normally when I give this talk, I don't name names, but because this is a private, closed group of friends, I'll name names. So this one comes from Clearview Social. You aren't charging your first customers enough. So I believe in true believers, which is that if you've made your MVP correctly, then it does one particular task extremely well. And it probably leaves a whole lot of other stuff TBD or off to the side for later, which means the people who are willing to use this are people who need that problem solved very badly. And they're willing to put up with an unfinished product in order to have access to that solution. So I believe that your first customers will be true believers. Now, founders that I've worked with, they have an internal pressure to validate their idea. So they badly want to see their idea proven out by racking up yeses. And they're very afraid, the founders I've worked with, that they will lose somebody on price. And that doesn't help their ego. I'm not saying founders all have a huge ego, but I'm saying ego as a concept. The idea that somebody's like, oh, this looks great, but I can't pay $300 a month, so I'm not going to use it. And then you don't get that dopamine hit of, I just got a new user. This is a very real pressure from the founders I've worked with. And I had one of my founders would always, if they got a no on price, would be like, oh, well, will you use it for free? So they just negotiated their entire price away because they really wanted to get that +1. But if your prices are too friendly, you might not be demonstrating product market fit at all because you aren't testing the ability of people to part with real money for your solution. So a user that you get for $0 a month essentially doesn't validate PMF for you whatsoever. You've proved somebody will use your product, but not that they will pay for it. So here are some things I've seen in my dozen startups. If what you want to win is a race to the bottom price-wise, you don't like the prize once you do win it. So this is advice I believe very strongly. If you're not Amazon, right, where the whole point is to compete on price and come in at the lowest price point. If you're a SaaS company and you're like, well, the other competitor is $100, we're going to be 50. Congratulations, you've taken your market and slashed it in half, right? So you don't like the prize you win when you win a race to the bottom. And then the other thing I've seen is that over and over again, your board will ask you why you aren't raising prices. So I've been at these startups as they went to different board meetings and people are like, why is this not $150 a seat a month? Why, you could just raise your prices. Now, the other thing I've seen is that this really benefits your customer support department because of what I like to call the inverse law of entitled users, which I'm sure there's a real name for out there, but people who use your product for free are much more demanding of your support team than people who pay a large sum of money. I've seen it over and over again at SaaSes. You give your product away for free, people expect the world of it, and then they leave a 2-star review on the App Store. You charge $9.99, people are starting to understand they paid for this, so it has some warts. If it's $1,000 a month software and it goes down for an afternoon, people write in and are like, okay, let me know when it's back up so I can finish my work. It's just, I don't have a good explanation for it. Todd, you have something to add?
I think the same pricing psychology applies to like getting clients to begin with, like as a fractional CTO, like as the price moves up of your services, the clientele is a lot better. So it's interesting to note, like this is a lesson from like lower ticket or even mid-ticket SaaS, but also pricing for consulting services or what have you. I think the same phenomenon happens. Like the clients that I've, with the highest LTV are usually, or the average or highest average order cost is the easiest to service. They expect
I completely agree.
That is so counterintuitive, but I guess I feel like I've seen glimpses of that. Like you just sometimes when you are searching for something like completely not even technology related, almost like house or something, where you almost set the minimum price. Where you're like, I want to filter out sort of like riffraff or sort of whatever. I guess there is something to be said about like the sense of premium quality that you're getting for what you're paying for and the sort of psychology behind that. But that does not make sense to me. It's kind of funny, like see it. What? You're not paying anything. Why would I give you high quality support? Why are you expecting that? Like, what the heck? I'm just supposed to, like, it doesn't seem like it makes sense, but I guess I could see it be one of those counterintuitive truths. It sounds like you've seen this a lot.
Yeah, I simply have. At Hello Audio, we offer 3 tiers: Standard, Pro, and Powerhouse. Standard is $10 a month. Powerhouse is $100 a month. Our angriest users who demand the most from their podcast and insist they're going to leave and take their business elsewhere in every support email, and are rude and tell off the support person. They're all standard tier. They're all $10 tier people, never the powerhouse, even though powerhouse pays 10 times as much. Jim?
After 15 years in open source software, when you look at how obnoxious people are to developers about where's my feature, if you don't give me my feature right now, you know, it's just totally, I totally agree. I mean, it's totally a thing on so many levels.
Aren't humans just awesome creatures? Aren't we just so good?
Yeah, we're really cogent. We really make a lot of sense all the time.
Well, and the thing I'm trying to figure out is which one of my 100+ behavioral economic things drive this. I mean, Bill talked about this months ago, and that's still been brewing in the back of my head. I need to stare at the behavioral economic codex of like 100 things and decide which one this maps to, because it's got to be explained by something, because it is universal. It is us as humans and the way we were born. It has nothing to do with the way we were educated or lived or anything. It's just a thing.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious, like, you know, because it's often touted that the higher price point gives a higher perception of value, right? But then I'm always wondering, okay, well, if a customer has a higher perception of value, how much of that perception is just purely in their own head versus how much value we actually need to deliver based on a higher price point? Which actually kind of leads to a question of, if you're just getting into this for the first time and you're setting your first prices, like me, I would have a pretty severe bout of imposter syndrome and would kind of attenuate my prices to match what I think I can actually deliver. But if I really lean into this counterintuitive approach, I just raise my prices by, you know, some maybe not arbitrary amount, but based on, you know, feedback that I get from you guys, let's say. And I would expect that the customers would naturally expect more of me. You see, it's like a bit of a confusing interplay. Like, yeah, I'm not sure if there's a question in there, but that's what I'm observing right now anyhow.
Yeah.
That's why I'm curious about the behavioral economic codex. There's got to be something that explains this, or a couple things coming together. Has to be.
And this goes back to the last slide. Investors, advisors, and consultants will all ask you why you aren't raising prices. So at Clearview Social, Adrian kind of had a thing for high-priced consultants. He would, like, every couple months bring in some $10,000 entrepreneurial opportunity system, traction. These may sound familiar to people who have worked with these sorts of consultants before. They would sit down and do a deep dive on the business, and we'd have a 2-day immersive session, ideas, vision, mission, culture. And every single one of them was like, why is it not $50 more per seat? And so I'm to the point now where when I advise my new startup clients, I save them the $10,000 consultant and just ask them why it's not $50 more per seat. So the startup in question, Clearview Social, was a social media employee advocacy engine. It basically was like a LinkedIn supercharger that a large corporation would buy, and it would jazz up all their employees' LinkedIn profiles with company content to keep people top of mind and top of feed. And it entered at several $100s per month. Users loved it. We paid a lot of advisors and consultants who begged us to raise prices, and we successfully raised prices once a year going forward for 4 straight years without ever losing a client on price. Obviously, this can backfire. Use your eyes and use your ears. If somebody's like, you are losing me as a client because of this price hike, then maybe you didn't make the right call. But if your users love you, you're good. And everything's getting more expensive anyway.
One thought on the pricing is, I think the problem is a lot of founders start from like what sounds good and feels good, or even what's comparable for SaaS prices, instead of reverse engineering the cost of the problem and then making it some fraction of that cost. So then you can justify the cost and you don't have to feel that imposter syndrome as much, because you can say, well, the alternative is going to be X. That's why this is Y. And then it becomes if they trust that it's going to deliver on the solution, it becomes a no-brainer because it's a tenth of the cost or something.
Yeah, and I have a thought about that too, because like the solution I'm building right now, PO Pro, is for dealing with construction professionals, and we're reducing friction between purchase order processes from on site to the office. And so in order to kind of go the route to determine a price based on that, we'd have to really dive in and kind of measure the amount of time that we're essentially taking or making available for the people that would be using the app, right? And multiplying that by their wage and whatnot to see what the value impact is on their end, which requires like a really deep dive, which everybody should do. But I feel like a lot of startups will avoid going that deeply because it's just a lot of extra work versus just defining the solution and being really engineering focused or something like that. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think people do under research that, and really it helps validate just how badly the market needs the solution in the too. So it actually helps you, like the more you deep dive into the cost of the problem, it's almost like starting with the price of the service tells you, is this a problem we're solving? Because there's all kinds of problems and all kinds of, ideas out there. So kind of starting with the business model, not a lot of people do this, but I think starting, at least putting some emphasis into that up front helps multiple fronts, not only monetization later, but also like validating the concept in the first place.
And one thing that really helps here is having 3 radically different pricing tiers with different amounts of features, because everyone is coming from a different place financially. So there may be people who really want to use your product, but they're in a place where they can afford $10 per user per month. And that's the facts. And so there should be a form of your product that is available to them for that. There will be other people for whom price is no object, and they work for Datadog or IBM or Citrix or something, and they'll just waltz in at whatever the enterprise plan is. So have there be a way for people to pay you $10,000 a month when such a customer arrives on your doorstep. This is something we ran into at Hello Audio, where we had the $15 tier for 1 podcast, the $50 tier for 3 podcasts, and the $100 tier for unlimited podcasts. That left nowhere to go for a university who signs up and syncs over 1,000 professors to all host their professor podcast. We didn't have an enterprise tier, so that door was closed to us. If we found ourselves in a situation where somebody was ready to give us 25 grand a month, we didn't have a way to say yes to that. And this is side note, but this is something I take over into my Kickstarter too. For my new album, you can back it at $5, you can back it at 10, or you can back it at 100. And the whole idea is just like, most people won't pay $100 for an album, but there's a couple people who are true believers who will. So I leave that door open to them to get that package. And then for everyone else, there's 5 and 10.
I think that's also good for like price anchoring. Like if they see just how high it can go, it makes it easier to justify the lower costs. So even if they're not in a position to go for that high tier, it reinforces like the value of the lower tiers. So I think it makes getting those sales even easier.
Yep. All right, lesson number 2. This one comes courtesy of Kangaroo Time. You never rewrite the whole thing from scratch. So I believe in dancing with the one that brung you. Your current product has brought you this far, and you don't discount that. So here's what happens everywhere I get hired that has a legacy product. It has warts. It has bugs. The engineers hate this one module. There's like this one part of the code that nobody will be like, oh, I'm never touching that again. But you're already at so much $100,000 ARR, and it's the current product that got you there. So you iterate, you refactor. Other engineers will be clamoring for a rewrite. They always know how they would do everything better, knowing now what they know then. But here's what the benefits you're not seeing of the product you have today. Most of the things you think of as bugs and quirks are actually edge cases that you're going to have to solve for all over again. So if you're like, oh, why does the credit card processing always get overloaded on Friday afternoon or something? That's a bug, that's a quirk. And it's like, actually, it was written that way 3 years ago by somebody who doesn't work anymore, who doesn't work here anymore, in order to deal with the scheduled maintenance downtime on the server's API. So you're going to wind up facing that problem again in your rewrite and wind up with the same edge cases. The second benefit is that the team you have knows how to work on it. And the third benefit is that it's currently live and earning you money today. So here is what happened at Kangaroo Time. A new engineer, this guy, is hired with an advanced tech stack and next generation solutions. All right, they brought me in. Bill, your job is to get us off of this monolithic, single Wumbo-sized server running Ruby on Rails that is the API server, web server, database server, Redis server, and email server all in one. Because when you work in Ruby on Rails, it really lends itself to that kind of an architecture, especially for startups. So I was hired to bring in and build v2.0. It was going to be all serverless in serverless lambdas written in Node.js. And that went on for 18 months before it was scrapped. Here is what happened. The dev efforts were diverted away from the actual platform, from Kangaroo Time v1, while we all focused on building Kangaroo Time v2, leading to a vicious spiral where people hate v1 even more because it's stagnating. So v1 is out there being used by people today, and we say v2 is coming, v2 is coming, but since we're all working on v2, nobody's maintaining v1, and v1 is suffering, and customers are leaving over that. Then there was an exodus of engineers. Herman left, Matt left, Carlo left. They were all proud of what they built in Ruby on Rails. So they left and took all their knowledge with them. And also, this is an aside, but the same thing goes for UI UX designers. If you hire a new UI UX designer, there's a rewrite of your front end coming down the pike. I've never
Guaranteed.
seen UI UX designer get hired somewhere and not make a whole new component library. It's part of the game. See, I'm getting some
So
chuckles.
true. Yeah, so true.
So the right way to do it is refactor, refactor, refactor. Use the strangler pattern. Replace one thing at a time with microservices that piecemeal swap out what I should have done instead of starting a brand new project from scratch and doing everything right this time. Was I should have separated out the email server from being the rest of the main server and made an email microservice. I should have put us on Elasticache for Redis instead of having the machine run Redis. I should have started making individual API serverless lambdas for particular API endpoints, and then eventually piecemeal ship of Theseusing out the whole product. You think of it as v1.5, not v2.0. And then here's a management tip. You have to think from the perspective of the engineers who are seeing their cheese moved. Do they feel they still have a future at your startup? So one thing that I was blind to at Kangaroo Time was the fact that, you know, when they hired me, and this is their mistake, they came in and said, there's a new sheriff in town. We're doing things the Bill Bolden way now. We're on Bill's stack. And what does that say to Herman and Carlos and Matt? Like, well, I'm a Ruby on Rails guy. I don't have a future here. They were all gone within 6 months, taking all their institutional knowledge with them. Since then, Kangaroo Time v2 has come out about 3 years after I left. So all's well that ends well. They're actually doing extremely well. They just raised $36 million in a Series B. So good for them. I own like 5 shares. Any questions about you never rewrite the whole thing from scratch?
this is definitely like, I feel like yeah, I learned this lesson like a while back, and yeah, I feel like in hindsight I was so adamant about like how we couldn't keep going without having to pause everything and be like, why are we talking about new features? We can barely support this thing. And like, it was this huge dramatic deal on this product team I was on in the past. And then like looking back now, I'm like, gosh, I was so naive. Like there's a super senior guy on the team who's, you know, he had been working there for like 20, 30 years or something crazy. And he was just like this Zen turtle attitude about everything where he's like, it's all going to be fine. And I like never understood how he had that attitude. It was just like, what? We can barely do anything. Come on, we got to tear everything apart. And like in hindsight, it's so naive to think you could just do that. Like, you know, if you think, oh, I need a whole new car because I need an oil change or something. It's not like how it works. It's just, you have, and like, I feel like that's actually like a hurdle that it's almost more like from junior kind of going up to like mid to senior level is like getting over that lesson of being like, okay, this is the job, is like dealing with all these things you outlined. I think your steps are the exact right solutions for dealing with it. And progress over perfection is like another phrase that I've kind of come to love over the last couple of years, is like, yeah, is this going to be perfect after this little refactor? No, but like, is this little microservice that we piecemealed off, is that better than what was there? Is that progress towards perfection? Yeah, let's just do that then. Like, even though there's going to be still this big mess. And yeah, I've just really tried to internalize that, because it's against my nature, at least personally. Like I do, or I think as all engineers, you want like shiny, clean, crisp. You want to have that feeling like you can move mountains with your code. And if you don't have that feeling, you think it's a problem, but it's not. I'm trying to sell something. We're trying to deliver business value, not clean code, you know, all the time. So
yep, I completely agree.
Another thing I think is important that you're getting into is like the politics of coming into an existing project, dealing with those, managing like the institutional knowledge, the tribal knowledge without throwing that out. And that ends up being a huge cost. So how do you do it delicately with respect to the existing team and actually create an opportunity for them to upskill or reskill, or whatever word you want to use, to have a future at the company in this new direction? So if like the company's betting on a whole new stack, making it clear and having the space for people to ramp up on that new stack instead of having to like wholesale replace technology and team, because to replace both is, you know, very risky and very expensive at the same time. So we did something similar at Groupon around IPO, had to basically refactor the monolithic Rails app into microservices and Node. And so this was hard because Groupon had just made like an acquisition of a consulting agency that specialized in Rails. So they acquired, I'm not even sure what the cost was, but 30 or 40 developers that all knew Rails. And then it was decided that the technology stack was going to shift to Node. And so had to figure out how to use those people in a way that they were happy with and that served the business. So anybody who's doing fractional CTO work coming into an existing project, you have to put a lot of emphasis into this and energy into how to migrate gradually, and not ruffle feathers unnecessarily.
One of my major takeaways was I won't let myself be introduced as there's a new sheriff in town anymore. I did this much better later at a company called Spectre, where I was being hired to be the new sheriff in town, take charge of a dev team that was going astray and everything. But I applied the lesson I learned from Kangaroo Time, and I did not let them position me as such. You tell everybody, here's your new boss, we're doing everything a new way. And I had much better retention. Right, lesson number 3.
I have one more question about that, Bill. Are there any edge cases where like a rewrite is actually justified?
Yes, if a project has clearly failed or has not been brought to market. Right. So if your product is up and running and making you revenue, you have at least done something right. And I beg you to preserve that. I've never seen a V2 of a running service succeed.
Interesting.
That said, I have frequently been brought in when people have been working with the existing developers for 3 months and there's no product or release on the horizon. And you have to say, you didn't pick the right vendor. These guys are jokers. I know a better way. And in
Right.
that case, you have to wash away the bad.
Right.
So I would say the real defining difference is something that's working and earning revenue.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a good metric there.
I think rewrites can happen, but they take forever. I have been a part of that one, the one I mentioned at Groupon. It took 2 years to roll this out globally. And there were still parts that were still legacy, but that platform that we took 2 years to build is still running, 10 plus years later.
And what was the impetus for that? Like, that's a huge migration. There must have been a big business reason for that.
Yeah. The reason was Groupon was acquiring clones at the time. So like at the time, there were tons of daily coupon startups popping up and just cloning the Groupon model. Every
Right.
country in the world had their own version. And so Groupon's solution was just to roll all those up and just buy them all. So then they all had separate needs, like localization, that all the markets had such different needs and separate teams. Like this is like thousands of developers, it's a huge organization. So it was simple, like the monolithic mono repo just wasn't going to work for that many people. Like we got to the point where like a build would take 45 minutes for all the tests to run. And it was just, the developer cost was insane. And so had to move to a microservice architecture for the business to even proceed.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, lesson 3 comes from transparency registry. Don't go so deep on cool tech you forget to bring a product to market. So the coolness of your tech stack is not the trench you'll actually be fighting for startup success in. The trenches where the battle is won will be product, sales, marketing, and sometimes ops. Nobody ever got acquired because they used Kubernetes so well. The minute your AI engine or blockchain algorithm or whatever your secret sauce is and it's fit to do the task, switch and pivot to building out the UI UX that brings it to market, and switch engineering to working on that rather than iterating on improving it further. Because the temptation among your engineering departments to stay in the tank can be strong. I'm talking with an associate right now who's been working on perfecting their AI algorithm for their new startup for almost 2 years. And they keep going back in, and there's no thought being given to what form it will take or the sign up form where you can actually start using it or pay for it. They're still working on like how good are its recommendations. Here is some things that I've seen. We delayed a release at one company to switch everything from REST to GraphQL because one of the senior devs liked GraphQL better because GraphQL is so nice and neat. And at Transparency Registry, we spent months updating all the consensus algorithms for their blockchain before go live. So talking about this one, this product had been in development for 18 months with no release to prod on the horizon. The engineers were having too much fun. They got to work on a blockchain product, which was heaven for these blockchain engineers. And so every day, what we needed was to put up a user interface that would do CSV imports of banks' mortgage statements and log their mortgage statements to the blockchain. Now, the blockchain had been done for a long time. What was the dialogue about? Every day, arguments and debates about the consensus algorithm, the hashing algorithm, the algorithm that would determine which nodes on which servers were like the correct ones. They had successfully forked both Corda and Hyperledger Fabric and written their own forks of each of them and made 2 of their own consensus algorithms. I came in intentionally, there's a new sheriff in town, took everyone off blockchain work, put everyone on user interface work. We made it to prod 5 months after that, but we ran out of capital a month after release, which could have been avoided had we not spent so long going really up our own butts with the tech. So yeah, that's my lesson from Transparency Registry. Does anyone else have any tales from the trenches about a time they saw a team get so wrapped up in cool technology that they forgot to make a product?
I saw this with one company I consulted with last year. They were already like a public company, and the equivalent of this was like building all kinds of internal systems, like reinventing wheels, just because they loved to build. Like they would build their own subscription management system when something like Stripe was perfectly sufficient. Just building anything and everything from scratch. I think that's probably where I've seen it the most, like building things they never should have built in the first place. So yeah, it's like shiny object syndrome. We like to build, it's like an indulgent way to work. And so I think you have to have in the culture some sort of, well, having business sense helps a lot, but then actually having that sense of like discipline to know like what is fun and what we want to do versus what needs to be done. Cause you know, we're business resources, not just like artists.
I feel like,
I feel that for sure. Yeah, sorry, Agnes. The dopamine chasing is like something I've been guilty of. And I catch myself sometimes being like, oh yeah, I'm like really nerding out way too much on, or like you have to check yourself, but it starts like in your own head and internal, at least for me, like at my keyboard, nobody else, but I can see the same problem ballooning up to like a whole team of people, you know, have a good processes and things in check, someone to keep that in check. So I could see it just being this runaway train of chasing the dopamine of making stuff and building things and just completely, I like that, how you phrased it, where it's like, or what, I forget the exact wording, but like leaving the product behind. It's like, oh, well, like, damn, that was what we were, like, the money was back there. So like, wow, why are we over here now? This is kind of the wrong way to go. But sorry, I kind of cut you off.
No worries. I think you like hit the nail on the head too. It's you're chasing dopamine. I mean, it really comes down to biological impulses. We want to feel like we're doing something meaningful. And often what is meaningful for us are the things that we know how to do best. It feels like we're most productive. And the things we shy away from are going to be the things that we don't know very well. And so when we encounter them, they're really uncomfortable. We feel like we're not able, whatever. So I feel like if the founding team is all technical, that's probably going to be a big risk. So it's almost like when you're getting your initial team together, you want to deliberately seek out a product manager or someone who's just like really product focused, almost non-technical, but just can help communicate, and you know, somebody to really just take the reins on actually kind of managing the thing, but also shares the vision. Because I know I'm a solo developer on what I'm building, and I definitely fall into the same things. I'll sit there and I'll build things from scratch that I really didn't need to do it. I'll waste 2 days on something and then realize, damn it, if I just did a quick Google search, I wouldn't have had to spend 2 days on that thing. So it's definitely a work in progress.
Yeah, I'm hoping I can get out of this program, the tech leader stuff. It's kind of a little silly because it's like I know what I need to do. I just hoping I can internalize, and even these discussions help internalize it. But I'm trying to like install that. How you said, like needing someone else, like an external product person. I need to like have a part of my brain that's just like, hey, you engineer nerd, like snap out of it. It's like, who cares about this stupid thing? Like I need that in my head, like
right, yeah, exactly.
Rolling my own keyboard, you know. But I also like, just like, I know you got more stuff to go over too, but it was one thing else that came to mind with this was the metaphor of like a layer cake. I really like, where it's like you have a couple layers of a cake, you know, and customers want a whole slice of cake, and it's easy to accidentally go like give them one like horizontal layer instead of like a slice, you know, like kind of like it's a little bit more from like how we split up like work, you know, where it's like, here's the API piece, here's the UI piece. It's like, well, does the customer care that there's a microservice floating somewhere ready for UI? They probably don't care because they don't have a UI to use it. So it's like zero value, even though you build out this beautiful service. So kind of a little bit mixed metaphor, I guess, but I feel like it kind of applies to where it's like, get the whole slice done. Like no need to sit there marinating for 2 years on this algorithm. That's one layer of the cake. You know, we're trying to build a slice of it. So get the whole slice done and put it on the plate and get it out. I like that as like a kind of like analogy for this concept.
Yeah, it's all about agility. It's all about reining in the want of creation that's in developers. I mean, I've lived it. I've seen it. You know, everybody's like 80% done and they want to go do the next thing without doing that last 20% of the work, which takes a lot of time to like freshen up stuff and make it usable. And just everybody wants to chase the next shiny feature or capability. and it creates chaos for everybody, and it delivers a lot less value as a result.
I don't want to work on boring stuff, Jim. That's not what I'm here for. I don't want to work on boring stuff.
Yeah, well, being not paid is pretty boring too.
Yeah, I think that helps
Touche.
to root it in the business. It's like, what's fun is the game of business, using technology to service that. That's kind of how I've shifted my thinking, is like, it's, the technology on its own is literally worthless if there's not a business around it. Like, it will not last, it will not sustain. And so shifting to that sort of business viability, I think is helpful. So,
all right, let's move on to lesson 4. Tech should generally defer to the subject matter expert. Boy, did I learn this one the hard way. This one comes courtesy of Use Kitch, which is an Airbnb for commercial kitchen space. Just explaining real briefly what it was about. It's a site where you search in a metro area, you see all these kitchens you can rent. You need a place to make 400 muffins on Saturday, rent out a real kitchen and be, Iron Chef for a day. So your company needs to have a subject matter expert. Somebody at this company needs to have worked in this field for 10 plus years and be extremely close to the problem you're solving. Often it's the founder, right? But sometimes it's the head of product and sometimes it's the head of sales. I won't work with startups that don't have an SME. I see people trying to bust in and take advantage of a vertical that they don't have 10 years of experience in, which is why I work with non-technical founders so often. And I'm thinking, okay, you're a nerd who wants to apply blockchain to real estate, but you don't come from blockchain and you don't come from real estate. You just think there's money to be made there. Where's the person here who's been a realtor for 25 years, right? You need that person. Tech, which is me, which is experienced senior engineers or UI UX designers, will often bristle at something the subject matter expert claims needs to be done differently. So your subject matter expert will come to you and say, we can't have static prices on the website for renting these kitchens. It needs to be message to ask because everyone gets a different price. And I'm like, that's not how these websites work. That's not how these Airbnbs work. You want people to be able to pay for their kitchen, put $400 on their credit card, and then show up Saturday and cook. You have to have a price listed. Believe me, it'll never work. I've been working in the kitchen rental field for a decade, and people cook up prices after haggling. I fought and fought, and we went with static pricing. I should have listened to my SME. Because what happened was we went live with static pricing. Every kitchen who signed up was like, well, I kind of work it out individually with each renter depending on their needs. Like, if someone just needs counter space, that's one price. If someone wants to use the stand mixer, that's another price. I charge more for people who are running ghost kitchens, etc. I should have just listened, and tech should have deferred to the subject media expert. Here is a list of things I've been wrong about. So like at Hello Audio, we were trying to display thought leadership and be like, there's a 4-hour max on your podcast episode. Part of that is because I didn't want to solve a really hard problem of what happened when your podcast episode went over 4 hours, relating to the size of S3 multi-part uploads, and I didn't want to do that. So we're just like, well, you shouldn't have a podcast episode longer than 4 hours anyway. No one will listen to that. Wrong. The subject matter expert was like, oh, people do special anniversary editions that are 10 hours long. It's a huge draw. I was wrong. They were right. So here's basically the story I just told. So does anyone else have tales of fighting with their subject matter expert and finding out that their expertise in the field was right all along?
I'm going to go slightly different and orthogonal. And with my design master's degree, the one thing we as tech people don't do enough job on is user research of end users. who are your end users. And I think my friendly advice for not listening to the SME is like, okay, well, let's go find people to go talk to figure out what this is and do the user research to validate they're either right or incorrect. And I think, to your point, I do agree that technical people are like, oh, there's no way that would work. Why would you ever do a website that does that? Oh, I'm the smart guy. I've done tech for 20 years, right? But the second you get real humans and you watch what they really do, you can talk to them, but you'll only get, a quarter truth that way. You would have immediately solved at least some of the problems you're talking about here, right? With a little bit of empathy and user research for your target audience, which is a hard thing to do, and getting some of that qualitative data out of their needs. So that's my friendly sort of pivot to what you're talking about and how to help solve that problem.
Absolutely. More user research. We didn't do a lot of user research at Kitsch. And that was our bad. All right. If there's no further discussion topics, we'll move on to lesson number 5. They will steal your idea. Make it so they cannot steal your execution. This is my favorite quote. And whenever I appear on a podcast and they're like, what's your one piece of advice you want to leave everybody with? This is what I say. So what I look for when I'm interviewing startup founders who want to work with me is I look for a startup that could only be founded by them. So when your idea catches fire, it will be copied by somebody better capitalized and better resourced than you. What will set you apart then? And so you need to have an idea that you are the secret sauce, right? So there were other employee advocacy companies besides Clearview Social. None of them were started by Adrian Dayton. Adrian had been a LinkedIn consultant for about 10 years, traveling to the world's largest firms, IBM-sized firms, and running their corporate LinkedIn makeovers. And he had 10 years of experience doing that. And now he's making a software that maximizes your corporate engagement on LinkedIn. Somebody else who just is like, oh, I'm going to copy what Clearview Social does, we can do that too. They don't have Adrian Dayton. They can steal the idea, but they can't steal the execution. So here's what I mean. I look for somebody who already has hundreds of loyal contacts in their industry. They know where their first 200 customers are coming from. That's a great start. Or they wrote a book or ran a podcast, and they have 10,000 people ready to adopt their system. Copycats won't have my 25 years of experience solving this problem. So ideas are easy and execution is hard. I consider ideas to be so cheap and easy to come by now that I generally don't sign NDAs. If somebody makes me sign an NDA, I mean, I will, but I balk at it. I'm like, what do you really think I'm going to do? If I take your idea and build it tomorrow, is it even worth anything if it's not started by you? Because somebody will steal your idea and clone it. So what is it about your execution, your plan of bringing this to market, that makes it unstealable? Nobody can steal your execution. And so this is what I've seen too many instances of to count, except for the blockchain startup, which really was the only people doing what they were doing. Everyone else had copycats and competitors. There's a moment where your founder's heart sinks when they're on a sales call and somebody says, oh, your product is just like Thingly.io. And then they go and they Google Thingly, and there it is laid bare. And the most recent post on their blog is that Thingly has just raised $8 million pre-seed, and the founder's heart breaks. But you have to remember that Thingly has their own headaches. They have their own things that keep them up at night. So all you're seeing is the idea, not the execution. So the startup in question for this one is Hello Audio, who literally lived the actual nightmare. Their first developer stole the code, went AWOL, and launched the code that they had been contracted to write as a competitor. Career-ending move, for sure. But this first developer built a podcast hosting platform on contract for Hello Audio, then turned around, took the code, cleared out the GitHub, and spun up a clone under a different name and collected the money themselves. But the developer was not a podcaster who had worked in podcasts for 10 years, like the Hello Audio founders were. The Hello Audio founders were a husband and wife team who worked 10 years making a podcast about how to launch podcasts. They knew podcasts inside and out. So then they found me to build Hello Audio the second attempt. They had me sign a few things for sure. Burned once, burned twice. They had me sign a few things about assignment of IP, which I was happy to do given their experience so far. And then they easily overtook the competitor. They still had the benefit of being them, being the husband and wife podcast team who had podcasted for 10 years about making podcasts. Their product leapfrogged the competitor, which essentially failed to evolve or generate new features from the day she left. So from the day she stole the code, that product stopped maturing because it didn't have the leadership, didn't have the audience, didn't have the listenership. Now today, Hello Audio is alive and well and profitable, and the competitor is long since history. What do people think of that story?
That's awesome. It's just another riff on your SME point prior, but it's also what TK Cater is a guy around the marketing space and does coaching for SaaS businesses. He talks about finding true believers, which I think is also what you're speaking to. And then there's that book. What is the book? Outliers, whatever, where they talk about 10,000 hours to be an expert at something. And now maybe it's really 7,500, but there's an amount of time in saddle that's very important to become an expert in an area.
Right. So the thing I tell people when they're like, oh, I have an idea for a startup, but you can't tell anybody, is it's like, you should encourage me to tell other people. I actually saw a viral LinkedIn post the other day where somebody went and gave their idea away to potential competitors. And none of their competitors were interested in building the feature. They got on sales calls with people doing demos and being like, boy, I sure would love your CRM platform if only it had such and such secret sauce. And they're like, yeah, we're not going to do that. You can't get the startups to take your idea. Anyway, I really like this story because it ends with some justice and gets the just desserts doled out. And I really like that they came back from the actual nightmare.
I'm just blown away by the first developer thinking that they could succeed burning that bridge. Like, did they never want to be a developer ever again for startups? It just seems like insane risk. Like what the hell, beyond like the moral things, like what were they thinking?
Career-ending move.
Yes.
Yeah, for real.
I was going to mention.
Do you know where that developer is? I'm at least curious.
No, we referred to her as she who shall not be named. So I don't know her.
Yeah. My experience in life is people that do that somehow seem to keep middling their way through life because people are just so desperate for developers. They don't do the due diligence on people to go dig on their backstory the way that they probably should. That person's probably a founder, CEO, billionaire at this point because they're willing to just stand on people's throats like that.
Terrible.
You never know. I mean, I think some people actually find some form of financial success. They're probably miserable though still, unless they're a psychopath and they don't actually care and they stand on people's throats and they get up to the top. But if they do have some emotion, I feel like that's gonna stick with you. The fact that you're willing to kind of like steal someone else's hard work or idea or effort or vision or whatever and just try to take it and run with it without like proper communication, that's burning a bridge pretty heavily in my view. I don't know. I just wouldn't do that sort of thing.
Yeah, pretty amazing.
I was going to mention
the inverse of that, if I could, is a guy I worked with for a very long time. I was paying full freight to develop something, and then he got really pissed when he wasn't going to be the sole owner of it, and I was going to end up licensing it to him, and it was really interesting to live that experience of him feeling like, you're taking all my ideas, but dude, I paid all the freight to develop them. I developed them all. You never wanted to do a good contractor on this. Like, screw you. You know, it's just, It's crazy what
Yeah.
people think they're entitled to or not entitled to.
Angus, you had something else?
Well, I was going to mention that one of the major advantages of, like you're saying, that the people who are doing the startup, they need to have some deep expertise, or they need to have something, the execution has to be, there's something that the success of the business is dependent on something within them and not external to them. And that can't be duplicated, essentially, right? Like their execution in some way. And I just realized that, people who have a really deep expertise with a lot of experience, they actually do unscalable things. They just do the right unscalable things. They do the correct things that are unscalable. And I'm saying that out of a place of coming from construction. You'll see people who've got 20 years experience, and they walk around with half the tools that the younger people do. They don't, walk to and fro to get certain things, but they do make exceptions to that rule. And you don't know until you've lived through those experiences and you've made those mistakes that it's actually advantageous. It's not even that it makes perfect logical sense why you act the way that you do. It could be just something about like maintaining your energy, maintaining your something really outside of the actual delivering the business, but something that helps you to uphold your own, execution, that doesn't fit very well in a strategy. And so you'll do unscalable things on occasion because of your experience, where some people will say, oh, but why don't you just automate that? Or why don't you just, but that thing that they're doing actually requires deep sort of attention, I guess you could say, right? So if you're dealing with customers, you need to get right inside with the customer and have a really, close knit, intimate sort of relationship with them. And you can't just automate that just because you want to get 10,000 emails out. There are certain types of conversations you need to have in real time. And that's actually the thing that bigger companies who are well resourced aren't willing to do, because they're trying to move in a different direction. But as a founder, that's the thing you are willing to do, because that's the critical piece that they don't know about. So that's what I was reflecting on there.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And it kind of ties into what Jim was saying about user research not being a skippable step.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next up is the
Sorry, folks, I gotta jump off, but thanks so much, Bill. I'm gonna watch the rest of this. I'll watch the recording, but appreciate the talk. Looking forward to seeing the rest. So
thanks, Ryan. It'll be uploaded in the portal later today.
Cool. I'll be in the portal then. Later, everybody.
See ya. All right, number 5, the most controversial one. I always get pushback on this. Don't accept favors that can't gracefully exit favor space later. Part of being a startup founder is that favors are essential. Nobody builds anything alone. You will need and accept help on innumerable fronts. But it's key to understand that once you're a $5 million business, there's no way your bookkeeping is still going to be done by your co-founder's husband in her spare time. All favors die at scale. So in order to accept a favor, you must clearly be able to visualize what it looks like when that thing exits favor space later. Can you transition it away from being a favor to being a paid engagement? So here is favors that I have accepted. I've had people look over my pitch decks for me. I accept favors for introductions or networking. I'll take first drafts of legal documents. I'll take first drafts of marketing websites, like using Webflow or Wix. And I'll take a first draft of UI UX. Because in all these cases, there's a clear expectation of when the thing stops being a favor and there's an end to the engagement. You could pick up where they left off. So you could always take the legal document you were given by your lawyer friend as a favor and take it to another lawyer and say, here's what we've been using so far. Can you take this document and run with it? Here are favors that I don't accept. Data science work, engineering and development work, building out the sales funnel, and bookkeeping. So in all of these cases, there's a need for ongoing engagement that doesn't end, and it's never quite over. and it needs to be documented so someone else can document everything they're doing, so someone else can take it over later. So here are some things I've seen. A church friend doing all the taxes and bookkeeping did not scale past $1 million. This company took off, and the person was missing tax opportunities. You know, he was just an accountant, just a personal accountant who was doing it as a favor to a friend from church. He didn't know about R&D tax credits. He was leaving money on the table. I've seen the entire app developed as a favor by a friend, in this case, a friend's son. So here's where the startup comes in. This startup was Connector Street, which failed. It's one of my bigger failures. Connector Street was an idea for a social media networking app developed by somebody who I respect a lot. Her name was Andrea. And she had her friend Vince, his son, Mike, develop the app in React Native as a weekend project. This put her in a place where she had accepted a favor that could not exit favor space later, because the app started taking off and there was more work to be done, more features needed. When you accept this as a favor, resentment sets in when it's like, oh, I'm doing more work for you again this week. And it's like, well, I'll pay you now. What do you want? $100 an hour? Sure, I'll do it for $100 an hour. But the person never accepted that gig. They just wanted to do you their favor and be done. So the resentment sets in, and Mike starts really plotting and dragging his feet with these features for $100 an hour, because it's not what he wanted to be doing. You know, he wanted to make his family friend an app. The product just stagnated its way to failure. Eventually, things just stopped happening. You couldn't pay him to work on it anymore. So I'm really wary of accepting favors that aren't one and done, completable things. Does anyone else have any stories about a time they saw somebody accept a favor that turned into a burden later?
I gave favors for sure in ways that ended very poorly, in ways that in hindsight were moronic and stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you know, I really like I like your idea of like a clear boundary around a favor as kind of the rule, you know. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I found it's hard to, like, I like to help people, so I've helped a lot of people in the past in favors, but it's very hard to transition that to properly monetized. Once they know they've gotten you at a certain price, in this case free, it can be very hard to convert that over. So as a rule, I've just stopped doing favors, just have lower engagements. So like less time commitment at a lower rate, but have just had to stop doing favors because it never really transitions smoothly in my experience.
Yeah, exactly. To that point, Todd, you know, my current guy that I'm working with, he is here because I did offer him like a shoulder to cry on and a little bit of free advice. Like, yeah, that doesn't sound right. You know, those guys are terrible. But I always kept that line of like, if you want me to go any further, you know, this is the dollar amount and this is like what the first month's deliverables will look like. You know, do you want in or not? And with all the free shoulder to cry on stuff I gave him, he basically got to the point where like, okay, what's it going to take to make this ping go away? Right. Which is the holy grail of sales. If someone can come to you like, okay, I think you can help me. You've talked enough about what it is you've done. How do you help me? What does it look like? You know, let them say yes or no.
Yep.
And maybe that's the key part of this, Bill, is getting people to say yes or no, not maybe, is a key part of an addition to your thought here.
Yep. Yeah. Key. All right. The last one's a quick hit. No need to talk in depth about it. But this deserves saying over and over and over again. I will repeat it till I'm hoarse. The money isn't there until it's in your bank account. This is just a startup lesson I've learned at all the startups, but particularly ad libs. So I've seen people go back on handshakes, right? I've watched my founders get off calls with investors where they're like, I'm definitely in for 100 grand. I'm going to have my assistant call you tomorrow. Assistant never calls. And eventually they get a call back saying, oh, they were saying that to be polite. Don't contact me again. I've seen chargebacks. I've seen failed charges. I've seen bounced checks. So the startup in question had a verbal commitment from investors to spend up to $50,000 on app developing. We found a vendor and we signed a contract with the vendor and we paid them their first $5,000. Then the investors simply got cold feet and backed out. They had a change of heart and they're like, I was thinking about this and I don't really want to sink my money into this. So I'm not in for the remaining 45. And they just ghosted. And you can't make them give you that money. So I had to break the news to the vendor that their work so far was in vain and no more was coming. All right, so here are those lessons in review. You're not charging your first customers enough. You never rewrite the whole thing from scratch. Don't go so deep on cool tech you forget to bring a product to market. Tech should defer to the SME. They will steal your idea, make it so they can't steal your execution. Don't accept favors that can't gracefully exit favor space later, and the money isn't there until it's in your bank account. All right, that's everything I had for today. I'm gonna have to extend this talk into a 2-hour version where I add in 5 more lessons from 5 more startups. But curious, any closing thoughts anybody else has or any other lessons you wanna share?
Brilliant, thank you.